Happy Friday! We made it to the end of the week. What a roller coaster of a week it has been. So many fantastic sessions. And if this is your first session and you're wondering who this crazy person is, I'm the creator and host of VID21. And we are joined by the wonderful Hatton, a massive fan of creating remarkable people leaders. He partners with organizations to close the leadership gap between their people leaders and their executive level leaders in particular. He's the author, trainer and coach and speaker based out of Melbourne. He's also a member of the Forbes Global Coaches Council, a Gallup Certified Strengths Coach, and author of Lead the Room. So Shane, I love your book, but we're not going to go into your book today. We're going to go somewhere new, which is really exciting. Which is where do great ideas come from?
It is. It's going to be a very interesting conversation, and it's nice to see some familiar faces in here. And Julia, what you do with this is, I can't believe it's been an entire year since the last time we did this. And so hats off to you pulling this together again.
Neither can I. It's been a very short year and a very long year at the same time, but can't wait to hear this. I love this whole topic. So great topic for a Friday afternoon, Friday evening. So let's get started.
It sure is. And I do want to take a moment. I know that some people are watching this live, some people are watching this back on the recording. And so I am based in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne in Mitcham. And so where I'm speaking to you from here in Melbourne, I'm on the land of the Wurundjeri people and the Boonwurrung people. So I want to acknowledge them as the traditional custodians of the land where I'm speaking to you from today. And so I want to extend that welcome to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples that are joining us for this conversation or watching back in the recording a little bit later on. And thank you to everyone who's joining live and taking out some time to be able to watch this. I'm looking forward to being able to share something that I've been thinking a lot about lately, which is this idea, conveniently enough, of where do great ideas come from? That's really the big topic of the conversation that we're going to have tonight. I want to explore this idea a little bit further. And I think there are two pretty big misconceptions around ideation and around great ideas. And they're two kind of big misconceptions that I hear. The first one is that ideas are reserved for some incredible people or remarkable people or exceptionally talented people. And so that's the first misconception around ideas. The second misconception around ideas is that well, maybe they're just born in this kind of moment of insight. It's like someone gets this epiphany, this kind of light bulb moment, and that's where ideas come from. And if we were to, I guess, just pause for a moment and hold that assumption to be true, like let's just assume for a moment that only some people can come up with great ideas and that those ideas exist within a moment of insight. If you held them to be true, you could understand why people can be a little bit hesitant around creativity and around ideas, right? So people go, well, maybe I'm not one of those creative people. Maybe I'm not some of those people that can come up with the great ideas that could change the world. Or maybe it's just somebody else's idea, or maybe that idea drops into the back of your mind and you think to yourself, you know what? Maybe it wasn't that great idea. Maybe it was just last night's pizza speaking to me. It's probably not me. And I actually think it couldn't be further from the truth in terms of our creative capacity. I think there is this idea that ideas are for somebody, and typically somebody else, or ideas exist within a moment. And what I would hope to do out of this conversation tonight would be to shift our thinking from ideas being about somebody else to ideas are for everybody. And that ideas aren't just a single moment in time, but ideas are actually a process and actually can be quite a methodical and practical process. And for me personally, I would consider myself probably a naturally ideative kind of person. I do my Gallup Clifton Strengths, and number one in my theme is ideation. And it can be tempting to just believe that if you have ideation, then you're the ideas person, nobody else can come up with it. What I've learned is that what my brain does when it comes to ideas is walk through a process just a lot quicker than probably other people. It's not exclusive to me. It's actually a process we all go through. But more often than not, my brain does it in a really rapid fire kind of way. And so what I want to do is take a step back tonight and go a little bit slower through the process and actually explore, if we were to create this is going to sound funny, a practical approach to a creative process, what might that look like? What might those steps be as we navigate our way through that? And so I want to draw on a couple of people who've really influenced my thinking lately around ideation. And the first one is actually a TED talk that I watched not long ago by Stephen Johnson. And he talked about ideas as being this new network of neurons firing in sync with each other inside our brain. It's this new configuration that's taking place in our brain that hasn't happened or hasn't been formed before. And for me, in my mind, I think, well, this is something that every brain has the capacity to be able to do. Every brain has the capacity and the capability to be able to connect new networks in a way that hasn't been connected before. And so this reminds me that everybody has this capacity. And the second one was this book from James Webb Young, one of my favorite books actually, called A Technique for Producing Ideas. And he was one of the first people who introduced me to this idea that ideas are a process and they can actually be broken down into individual stages. And so these two ideas, that ideas are for everybody and ideas could be broken down into some kind of systematic and pragmatic way of approaching them, they really shaped my insight around this. And this book from James Webb Young was written back in the 1940s, and it's still just as relevant today in terms of what it could do. I want to address the first one. For me, when it comes to this ideation, we typically associate ideas with one of these, with a light bulb. And that whole idea of like the emotion or the emoticon that goes beside an idea when you type it in your phone is that a light bulb pops up. And I think in those moments, we associate the light bulb moments because it's like, oh, I've had an idea. The light bulb goes on. And I want to kind of debunk that for a moment. Some of you may have known the story behind the light bulb. Some of you may not. If you were to think about the light bulb, who invented the light bulb, you might say it was invented by this guy here, Thomas Edison. And you would say, yep, Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. But if we were to actually go into the history of it, which you can learn about online, you can actually go through the history. It's not fascinating a read, but it's insightful nonetheless. Let's kind of go on a bit of a journey of what actually the light bulb invention process looked like. We need to go back probably to 1809. This guy here, wearing a delightful scarf, 1809, Humphrey Davy, basically had this concept, this idea of pulling bamboo together and attaching it to a battery. And it started to glow and it started to get, brighter and brighter. And then he realized that essentially it was too bright. It wasn't actually commercially viable for him to be able to use bamboo to be, use charcoal to be able to create the filament for a light bulb. And so then this next guy in 1840, Warren de la Rue, came in and said, well, let's take that idea and let's adapt it. And rather than using charcoal as the main ingredient, let's use platinum, because that seems like a better filament to be able to use. And the problem with that is that he found out, well, it was too expensive to try and actually commercialize that in the process. So two people came in, Henry Woodward and Matthew Evans, and they didn't really do anything in the process other than patent the idea. So they didn't add anything new to it. They just went, oh, so this seems like a good idea. Maybe we'll put a patent attached to it. So it was essentially just too similar to what everyone else did. And then this guy here with the glorious beard, Joseph Wilson Swan, came into the conversation, went, well, maybe we could use carbon and put it in this kind of airtight container, and maybe that could work. And it actually didn't work. It ended up burning out too quickly. And so it died off, and the lifespan of it was too short. And Thomas Edison comes along, and what he did essentially is bought the patent from Henry Woodward and Matthew Evans and went, what if we used the bamboo filament to be able to do that? And that's where it had a kind of commercial viability that was attached to it. And so all of a sudden, this idea that seemed like this moment in time was actually made up of a series of moments throughout that, building upon those ideas and collecting them together to ultimately create what we would describe as the light bulb moment. And so I think it's important to remember that when it comes to creativity and when it comes to our ideas, we often see one element of a much bigger picture. And so what I want to do is walk through what I would just say is probably 6 big steps that we can walk ourselves through if we want to even be able to create some of those, what we might see as epiphany or light bulb moments. And I want to walk through those 6 stages tonight. So if we were to walk through the ideation process in a methodical kind of a way, I would describe them as 6 different stages that have 6 key moments that we can go through when it comes to the creative process. The first moment that I think we step through, or the first stage in the process, I would describe as the moment of discomfort. And I talk about it as this stage of the process, which is around frustration. And the reason why I think it's an important place to start is typically our best ideas are born out of our biggest areas of frustration. If you think back to some of these incredible ideas that have taken place, somewhere along the line, there was a problem that you experienced that frustrated the life out of you. Maybe you were, you were doing something in a particular way and it was taking so much time, energy, and investment. And you were like, there must be a better way to do this. If you look at some of the great inventions that have come out in terms of what we would describe as innovations, they started out with someone going, I don't like the way that this is. And more often than not, our biggest opportunities are actually waiting on the other side of frustration, which hopefully for you, if you've spent any time in the last 12 months getting frustrated, I would suggest to you that potentially a great idea is on its way. A lot of our great ideas lie on the other side of opposition and frustration. I think about it often like, when you get a rock in your shoe and it's like you're walking along and it's this constant nagging away at you until you get to the point where you're like, I can't do this anymore. You kick the shoe off and you drop the rock out and something changes. I think if there's not frustration in the creative process, then there's probably not motivation in the creative process. I think frustration allows us that starting point to say, this annoys me so much that I want to do something about it. And I would suggest that if there's no frustration, you probably won't have the motivation to want to go out and change something. So in this stage of the process, the question that you want to ask yourself and to reflect on would be right now, what's happening that's frustrating me? What am I noticing right now that's just getting under my skin? And if you're not noticing anything right now that's frustrating you, the simple act of what you could do from here is just do something. The moment you start doing something, something will frustrate you. You come into contact with people and people frustrate you. You come into contact with systems and systems frustrate you. Within your organization, just go anywhere in your organization, have a conversation with any other person, and there's a good chance that will frustrate you in some particular way. I reckon one of the big barriers to this first stage of the process is familiarity. The more familiar we are with a situation, the less frustrated we get with it, the more complacent we become, and the less likely we are to want to look for alternative solutions. We kind of stay within the safety of the box that we find ourselves in. There was a really incredible case study back in 2009 that Harvard Business Review released, looking at this experiment that was taking place between fraternities and sororities. And they basically gave them an activity and said, we want you to, it was kind of like a murder mystery. We want you to solve this murder mystery. And they were broken down into groups of 5, given the opportunity to be able to tackle this complex problem. And about 5 minutes after the experiment had started, they introduced what they would describe as an outsider or an intruder. And the intruder was someone who was not part of the fraternity or the sorority. And what happened is that person would come in, they'd bring an external perspective. They didn't know the people. It took a little bit of time. There was a little bit of frustration that came with that. When they asked the people in the sorority and the fraternity at the end of it to evaluate how the experience was for them, they described it as less effective, less successful. It wasn't as easy. It was a lot more friction, a lot more frustration. And yet the results shifted from people getting the outcome of the murder mystery or the problem, the complex problem right, about 30% of the time. It doubled to around 60% of the time. So the results were better, even though the process was more frustrating. And one of the things that I've learned over time is that familiarity might make us comfortable, but diversity and difference and those frustrations and those frictions actually make us better. So if you're in this stage and you're going, there are some things that are frustrating the life out of me in my organization, in my team, the question might be, well, is there something in here that could spark creativity if it's frustrating me? So that would be the first stage of this process, would be a moment of discomfort that comes in that frustration. What could you do to even sometimes create those moments of friction and frustration to spark some of that creativity and some of those ideas? The second step in the process I want to look to is this process of exploration. And I would describe this as the moment of curiosity. I love curiosity. I think curiosity is one of the most underrated skills when it comes to leaders, when it comes to our workforce. And I think we all understand just how valuable curiosity is. But the question that I would ask you when it comes to curiosity is, are you willing to move past the place of assumption? I think assumption is one of those enemies of curiosity. When we think that we know all the answers, Seth Godin explained it. He said, ideas fear experts, but they adore a beginner's mind. I love that thought. Ideas are afraid of experts. The moment you step into the place of assumption and you become the expert, it's almost like ideas flee away from you. But when we sit in curiosity, we attract ideas to the conversations and we attract ideas to us. A good friend of mine was on my podcast last year. His name's Michael Dixon, and he wrote a book called Everyday Creative. And he had this incredible line. He said, if creativity is the art of connecting dots, then curiosity is the art of collecting them. And I've loved that thought. I've always kind of talked about and spoken about that idea of living a life that collects dots. I often think about it as like, those old school kind of dot the dot, connect the dot drawings. It's like you kind of scatter them all across the page, and then you sit down and you start to actually draw the lines between all of them and start to make sense of the picture that's sitting in front of you. I would say curiosity is this idea of dot collecting. How could we do things that collect the dots? There's a great book called The Medici Effect by Franz Johansson, and he wrote this book about the Medici effect out of the story of the Renaissance, and a family by the name of the Medici family, who you may have heard about if you haven't. They were essentially a banking family, and they kind of bankrolled in Florence in Italy all these artists and poets and scientists and philosophers, and they kind of created an environment where they could do what they do. And so as a result of that, people started to descend upon Florence. And he went on to say this. He said that together, they forged a new world based on new ideas and what became known as the Renaissance. And as a result, the city became this epicenter of creative explosion and one of the most innovative eras in history. I just love that picture of like, what would it look like if we created this environment where we allowed different disciplines and different ideas to be able to intersect and connect? And that's what he described it as. He described it as intersections. It might be about collecting dots, but he actually talked about it as the intersections of disciplines. And so when it comes to this second stage, one of the things that I'll often say to people is to go, what could you do that might spark creativity and curiosity? Who could you talk to that might see something different to the way that you do it? If you've got a problem and a frustration, rather than diving into assumption, what would it look like to sit in curiosity and ask other people about that problem? Not just from within your circle, but also from people outside of your circle. What are the ideas and people and experiences that you could do to start collecting dots? And I think there's a really beautiful example of this that was, there was an architect who, was, I think, designing a building in Harare in Zimbabwe, and was written about in Francis Johansson's book. And he talked about this idea that they were looking to build essentially a giant commercial building, one of the largest in Zimbabwe. And they basically approached this architect, his name was Mike Pierce, and said, we want you to design a building for us that can cater for the heat where it's being built. The only condition is that we don't have the money to be able to invest in air conditioning. And he had this incredible background in kind of a blend between ecology and architecture. And so he started to explore some of these ideas to kind of naturally cool the building. And so where he went to was actually termites and the termite mounds. And he started looking at the termite mounds and how they operated. And they noticed that they had this ability to be able to open and close different passages within a termite mound that allowed airflow to be able to naturally cool the building. And as a result of that, he actually built what is called the Eastgate building and designed the Eastgate building. And it basically operates in the same methodology where they're opening and closing different parts of the building and allows the heat to travel up through the building and out the top. And they're able to naturally cool the building and monitor and regulate the temperature using the same philosophies that they found in ecology. And so the question in this space is, in the process of exploration, what could you do to start to identify some of those intersections of ideas? So what would it look like if you started to explore how technology might intersect with, education? What would it look like if in your business we said, well, what if we took parenting and we took Uber Eats and we combined them in some way? What might the new combination be at that intersection? What if I went and asked a doctor about some of the experiences that they have in the medical field? When it comes to grocery shopping, you might go, they don't connect, they don't sit together. But what might you find if you connected minds together that see from very, very different perspectives? And I think this stage in the process of curiosity is all about asking the question, well, what could I learn? Who could I learn from? What experience could I draw from in order to be able to do something that I haven't been done before? And I think curiosity allows us to spark some of these creative ideas. I think the third stage of the process that we get to is this moment that I would describe as the moment of contemplation. We talked about frustration, which is that moment of discomfort where we get a problem. And then we go, well, how can we explore this problem from different perspectives and through new ideas and through new lenses? And then we get to a place where we go, what would it look like if I could sit with this idea, if I could put all the dots in the page in front of me and actually explore where's the connections between all of this? And I think the question that we'll ask ourselves in this point is, when I sit back and I look at this picture, what do I see? Where are those new networks firing away in my brain that are coming up with new possible combinations of how we can do this? And I think this requires us to be something which is quite challenging in the world that we're living in right now, is it's to be fully present. It's allowing ourselves to get away from the noise. I would suggest that probably the enemy of contemplation is noise. Is how do we get away from the noise for a moment to sit in this moment of silence and allow ourselves to see things shift and allow us to see things change. And James Webb Young in his book kind of talks about it as this idea of like the kaleidoscope. I don't know if anyone can remember that concept or that idea of the kaleidoscope. You put all the glass in there and then you sit back and you twist it and you look at it through different lenses and you watch the glass fall into different places. Now, all of a sudden you have this new picture. You've got this new idea that you haven't seen before. And I think about this moment of contemplation is like where we sit in front of a page and we say, let's twist things. Let's look at it in a different way. We look about how can we do something differently. And it requires us to have that moment of silence. Some research would say it takes about 23 minutes, 15 seconds for us to get back into a state of flow after we've been disrupted. Now, if that doesn't say the kind of world that we're living in when it comes to our disruptions, what would it take for you to just have those margins within your day, whether it's your work day, whether you work for yourself, whether you're in a business? What would it look like to carve out margins within your calendar to just sit with an idea, or to sit with a problem, or to sit with some of the curiosity mindset and be able to explore new concepts or new ideas? Probably it's a little bit challenging, but I reckon it's one of the key ingredients when it comes to coming up with creative ideas. I want to move to the next stage, the fourth stage in this process, which may sound very similar. The fourth stage is frustration. And I describe this as the moment of abandonment. And I describe it as the moment of abandonment for two very big reasons. The first reason I call it the moment of abandonment is because typically this is the place where people stop one step short of a breakthrough on their idea, because it looks very similar to step one of the process, which was frustration. Yet this frustration looks slightly different. It's that moment when you're just about to cross that threshold, that tipping point, or what I would describe as ultimately the valley of despair. It's that sense of like, I can't quite see over the mountain yet. It's like when you've just reached not quite the summit of the mountain and you still got that little bit above you and you're like, I just can't quite see on the other side of it. If you just hang on a little bit longer, when you reach the summit, you're like, oh, I can see with a different perspective now. But because it feels like frustration, it feels like the starting point, we tend to abandon that. And the second reason I describe it as the moment of abandonment is it's probably a moment in the process where we actually need to become a little bit detached. We need to actually take a step back and go, oh, maybe I'm a little bit too close to this in the picture. Chip and Dan Heath wrote a book called The Power of Moments, which I absolutely love. And in it, they talk about this experience they call the tappers and listeners experiment. And the tappers and listeners experiment basically broke people down into two groups, and they were tappers and listeners. And they basically gave the tappers 20 popular songs that people could recognize. And they said, we want you to go into a room, we want you to tap that sound out on a desk. And we want you to be able to allow the listener to guess that. And they asked them the question, how often do you think they're going to guess that right? And they said, we probably reckon they'll guess it right 50% of the time. The listeners guessed it right around 2.5% of the time. And one of the big reasons they said that, or they found that, was they described it as the curse of knowledge. And the curse of knowledge is once you know something, it's really hard to know what it's like to not know that. I'll say that again because it's quite confusing. When you know something, when you've got this deep level of expertise, it's really hard to know what it's like to not know that, to be able to speak to someone who's never heard of that before. We get pulled down into the trees and it's really hard to see the forest. It's really hard to be on the other side of that. It's like when you're speaking to someone and they've got a little bit of something in their teeth and you go, I can't unsee that. Or maybe that's got a habit and you're like, oh, okay. Like now that you've told me that they do that, I can't unhear that, or I can't unsee that in that experience. And so I think in this moment, we can get like that when it comes to our ideas. We can get frustrated and pulled down into detail and think to ourselves, I just can't do this anymore. And there's a moment where we have to detach. And actually, I think one of the enemies of this stage of the process is attachment. We get too overly attached to our ideas. We need to actually disrupt ourselves. And I think one of the best ways that we can disrupt ourselves is ask yourself the question, what lights me up? Like, what's something that I do for fun? What energizes me? What excites me? Put down the idea for a moment and go away and do that. Maybe it's you love watching movies. Go watch a movie. Maybe it's you want to go for a run, go for a run. Detach yourself from the idea for a moment. You'd be surprised how quickly the glass in the kaleidoscope can fall into the pattern when you're doing something else. And I reckon we tip over that valley of despair, and it pushes us into the moment that we might typically describe as the light bulb moment, but what I would describe as that revelation moment. It's like almost like the curtain gets lifted and we see something in a new way, or I would describe it as that moment of clarity. And this is often the moment that's misunderstood as that light bulb moment. It's almost like we see it for the first time. The glass has fallen into place in the kaleidoscope and we go, yes, this is it. This is the idea. And so my encouragement to you, if you're in that stage of the process, the question you want to ask yourself is, how do I capture this? You know, maybe there's been times where I've been coming up with creative ideas and I've had thoughts. I'm like, this is just not landing for me. And the question that I'll ask myself is, okay, well, I just need to detach from this for a moment and I'll go running. And then I'll be running down the street and I'll be 2 or 3 kilometers away from home. And it's like it clicks in that moment. And I'm running. I've got nothing to do. I've got no way to capture it. And so what I've started doing is actually I've got a Siri command on my phone. And I say, hey, Siri, I've got an idea. And what it does is it opens up an app on my phone called Otter, and Otter transcribes what I'm saying. And so it's probably some of the most disturbing audio you've ever heard in your life, because it's me running through 3 kilometers, 4 kilometers of running and panting and suffocation. But usually somewhere within there's an idea or there's a thought. But for me, it's a way to capture it. More often than not, I was finding myself going away in these moments of abandonment, going, okay, I've let that go. And then the idea strikes. It comes in that moment. All the pieces fit together. And I go, got no way to record this. I'm sure I'll remember it later. I tell you what, I've lost $1 million ideas. I'm sure of it, because I just had no way to be able to capture that. And so I would say the enemy of this stage of the process ultimately is just distraction. Don't get distracted when the idea drops or that moment drops for you and the pieces come together. Which leads us to the last part of this process. And this part of the process is around collaboration. And the moment here that I talk about is the moment of truth. It's that moment where we take our idea out of our ideas pad, out of our thinking, out of our workbook, out of our computer, and we start to share it with the world. This is like this idea of who can help me take this idea and test whether or not it's a good idea. One of the phrases that I use with a lot of the clients that I work with is this phrase, test, don't validate. And it's a scientific approach to creativity and ideas. And it's this idea that we often want to go out with an idea looking for validation of it. Is this a good idea? Rather than going out and saying, hey, could we test this idea? How could we make this idea better? Seth Godin has a great thought on this. He said, until your idea interacts with the market, you're suffocating it. Great ideas are amplified when others build on this or build on your ideas. I love that thought that ideas need oxygen, and people who can collaborate with us bring an incredible amount of oxygen to our ideas. And so the last part of this is the moment of truth. It's like, how do I find other people who could help me take my idea and test it, stretch it, shape it, develop it? And if it needs to be reworked, how could I go back and rework it in the process? So I want to go for a quick moment and walk back through some of these steps here and walk through some of these stages. And if you're watching this later, you'll be able to grab a copy of this PDF that I can walk you through it in a more simplistic way. And if you're watching this online, it'll be on the screen as well. But here are the kind of 6 key moments that we walk through, from frustration, those moments of discomfort, that kind of rock in the shoe moment, the problem that you're experiencing. If you're in that stage of the process right now, just do something. Get out there, experience something, find something that annoys you. Ask yourself the question, what makes me angry? What makes me passionate? Then go out and explore. Go out through the lens of curiosity and say, what could I learn about this? Who could I talk to about this problem? What ideas and experiences could I go and engage in that might sharpen the way that I'm thinking about this, or spark new ideas for this? What could I do to sit down with all the information I gathered and just sit in a moment of silence and go, how could I connect the dots here? If you find yourself getting caught up too much in the attachment of your idea, just step back, go do something fun, do something that lights you up, something that energizes and excites you. Wait for that moment where everything clicks into place and go, how do I capture this? What's the best way for me to capture the idea that I've got here? And then ask yourself, who could I bring alongside me to collaborate around this idea that might sharpen and shape the way that I do things? I actually think our ideas, our perception of ideas, is that they are this kind of whimsical, magical unicorn kind of thing that exists out in the middle of nowhere. This single moment that takes place, this epiphany that's just reserved for some select group of people. But I actually think great ideas are for everybody. Everybody can have a great idea. And it's actually not as whimsical or magical as it can be made out to be. It actually can be things that we can do that can trigger the process for creativity when we're working through it. And so before I finish up, and I want to give space for people who are here to be able to ask questions, to be able to explore this conversation, and I want to go back and read through some of the chat and hear what's been kind of coming through. But obviously there are people who are watching this who are at an individual level, and you're going, how do I contribute more ideas to our team, to our organization, in my business? I think this process will be really helpful for you. The next group of people are people who are leaders within an organization. And I think there is a distinct journey that we go on when we go from team member to people leader that is very different. Maybe the requirements or the expectation of you as a team leader look very different to what was required of you as a team member. And as a team leader, I think one of the creative shifts that takes place is that we actually become less about contributing great ideas to the conversation. And it becomes about, how do I create a creative environment within my team? And so I want to look at this process and just give you 6 questions that you could ask that might help facilitate a more creative environment using this process. And these questions ultimately come down to these big ideas. Number 1, is the culture resilient enough to talk about your frustrations? Do you have an environment that is not fragile, that is not upset when you talk about frustrations, when you talk about problems? Because again, remembering problems sit right just before that moment where we can actually create and spark ideas, that probably are great opportunities are waiting hidden inside the area of frustration. So if your culture is not resilient enough to be able to handle people talking about their frustrations, you're probably missing an opportunity to be able to explore some of the potential that's in that. The second thing is, are we creating environments where our thinking mingles? We often talk about creating social environments where our people can talk and where our people can connect. What are the environments that allow people to think and mingle their thinking? So when was the last time your IT department caught up with your HR department? When was the last time your marketing department caught up with your executive team? Where are these moments where everyone's different kind of thinking and processing and curiosity kind of mingles in these environments? And what ways do you have to be able to support that? Is it a board that exists within your office, an actual tactile board that you can put ideas and thoughts on? Is it a Trello board? Is it something electronic? What are some of the ways that you can interact people together that allows thinking? Number 3 is, do you have margin between your meetings? Is your day from 8 to 5, 8 to 6, 9 to 5, whatever your job is it so meeting to meeting to meeting that you haven't allowed yourself those moments of silence to be able to sit and think about things? Do your team members actually have margin between their meetings to go away and think? How would you feel if one of your team members went out for just, a couple of hours to a cafe and just sat and thought about some of the biggest problems they're experiencing and what some of the solutions might be to those problems? I know I've spoken to people about it, and they go, oh, I couldn't possibly do that. And yet they still wonder why there's not creativity and innovation existing within their team. Number 4 is, do your team have fun between tasks? Is it so caught up in trying to solve problems? Is it so caught up in trying to come up with creative ideas that you don't just have fun, that you don't detach from that for a moment and just actually do things that light you up as a team? Because again, like, some of these ideas can drop in those moments. Number 5, are there systems available to be able to capture some of the creativity that exists within your team? When you're in a team meeting and you're having a conversation and someone says, oh, I've got an idea, we should try something like this. And everyone goes, that's a great idea. How do you capture that? Is it taking notes? Is it recording the meetings? Does someone say something and go, oh, that was a really good idea, could you say that again? And they go, oh, it's gone. What are some of the ways that you can capture some of that creativity? Number 6 is, have you created a safe space for feedback? Does your team have the psychological safety that allows people to be able to share their ideas to be tested rather than seeking the validation for those ideas? And I think we play an important role as a leader in modeling what that looks like to our team. So I think if we can ask these 6 questions and we can actually answer some of these questions, I think we'll create a more collaborative environment within our organizations and also in the teams that we lead. And so with that, I want to say a huge thank you. And I want to create some space now. Maybe, Julie, I'll bring you back into the conversation. I'd love to hear what's been going on in the chat and potentially open up to any questions.